Live. Good morning, everyone. The Landlord Lingo Buster. Now, this is part one. It's a two-part show and vlog that we have, and it's setting up your tenancy right and the way to keep your property legal. So a lot of good topics to cover this morning, Jim. We'll be live on TikTok and Instagram. And
good morning to our viewers on TikTok. Good morning to our viewers on Instagram. Please feel free to ask all the questions you can. Just to exacerbate, just to tell a bit more, the Landlord Lingo Buster Part 1. This is set up your tenants in the right way and keep your property legal for the people, because you can't get enough information on the intro for TikTok and Instagram. So this is all about setting up your tenancy the right way and keeping your property legal as a landlord, even as a letting agent, to be honest. So if you want to hear all about this, please feel free. Richard, it's over to you.
So the question is, do you know your ARLA from your elbow? Or how about the GSR from the TDS? If you don't, you're not alone. There's a lot of landlords who, just like everybody else in the industry, the lettings world, it has become particularly a lingo to master, really, with plenty of phrases, abbreviations, and rules to keep in your head. And it's quite difficult to keep up. I mean, if you're a letting agent and you do it day in, day out, then it becomes a lot more of a habit and a way of doing things. A landlord who self-manages and things just don't have the time to keep up with it all.
Sporadic. It's more sporadic being a landlord, and that's the big problem.
Yeah.
Because a landlord, it's not your priority, to be honest. If you've only got one or two properties, which most landlords have got, you maybe want to learn all about the legislation, but then when you go into all that in depth, when people tell me, oh, I just want to get involved and I want to know about everything. Okay, is that really a good productive use of your time?
Yeah.
Is that time well spent? Would you not be better just letting a letting agent do it and go and taking your time and spending on something more worthwhile with your life? Maybe focus on your family, or focus a bit more on your career and make more money in your job and give that to people who really need it. That's my sort of mentality. It's like I've got it right down to the efficiency level where it's like I now monetize every single hour I've got and think to myself, do I really need to go away and do something like this and try and earn £100 an hour, or should I just go and earn £2,000 or £3,000 an hour? And what's the most productive thing? If I go and earn the £2,000 or £3,000 an hour and then I give it to people that need it, that makes sense for me completely. I don't need it. There's only so much you can need. There's only so much you need, and the rest is just for show. Let's be honest about that. So, give it to people that actually need it. Give it to organisations and charities that need it as well. So I always run with the mantra, Richard, and I'm going to get my wee platform here. If you can, you must.
Yeah.
If you've got the capability, this all came from Born Free, actually, from Shamwari, which is a sanctuary they have for the Lions Rock, for the lions and tigers out in Africa. And the Born Free Foundation run it. It was actually Tony, my daughter. She said, after being there for a month with them, says, I would love to just stay here and work for the rest of my life in the sanctuary with the lions and tigers and all the rest of it. And the leader said, so does everybody. He says, we can get people like that 10 a penny. He says, Tony, what do you do? And she says, well, I'm studying, and I've got my qualification to be a trainee accountant. I've got a degree in accountancy. And he said, well, to be honest, Tony, the best thing you could do for us is actually go on to be a professional qualified accountant. Earn as much money as you can, and the money you don't need, give it to us to help us. Because that's the thing we lack the most. We can get anybody to help out in the sanctuary, and everybody does want to help out. But this is
the funding to keep things going.
Yeah. And that's why I have this wee mantra in my head all the time. If you can, you must. And even not for you, for someone else.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Richard, I digress.
No, you're fine. You're totally fine. But back on topic, and I think I totally agree with what you were saying to begin with there, Jim. As a letting agent, I think I appreciate the time and effort and the resource that goes into keeping up to date with things. I do that as a job. And I think if you're a landlord on your own, you're just creating yourself another job entirely, trying to keep up with that. So, I think that it's wise to get somebody to do that. Yeah.
Been there and done it, and lying down to go to sleep in one of your rental properties at 3 o'clock in the morning because you're exhausted with trying to clean it with a pan and brush. because you can't put the Hoover on because everybody else is there, and you've got the tenant moving in the next day because that's what you'd agreed with them, and this is now the critical path. So having to lie down on the floor, because there's nothing else there, by the way, it's just carpets and curtains and decoration. You're lying down on a solid hard floor. You're just going to sleep for about 2 or 3 hours. You wake up, you go home, you get changed, you get washed and dressed, you go straight to your work after that. You come back, you've got all the paperwork ready for the tenant to move in, and then guess what? You do all over again. And that's literally the point I got to before I retired.
Yeah, and I think from staying on like the right side of the law, protecting your property and keeping your tenants safe, there's a lot to know as a landlord, and there's plenty of responsibility that goes with that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, while a lot of you will probably be familiar with things like maybe ARLA and SAL and LAS, ARLA is like the Association of Residential Letting Agents, SAL is the Scottish Association of Landlords, Landlord Accreditation Scotland. We've put together a 2-part blog. So as I say, this is part 1. So we'll do the second part in the next Lettings show. With all you need to know about Lettings jargon. And this week is about starting on the right foot and how to set up your tenancy right and keep your property legal. And we're going to kick off with just general lettings terms to know. And knowing the jargon is essential part of being a landlord. And there are some general terms you'll come across quite regularly. And I think just in general terms, like we say, lettings, I mean, we'll start like fixtures and fittings, Jim. Like people are like, what is fixtures and fittings? People say, I get this quite a lot if it's unfurnished, like, oh, I don't have any fixtures and fittings. But what you do, fixtures and fittings is a term for items you supply in a rental property, even if it is unfurnished. And that includes maybe curtains or blinds, floor coverings, your light fittings, and of course your kitchen units. And if you do any appliances in the kitchen and things as well. So it's always good to keep in mind that just because your property is unfurnished, you do still have a lot of fixtures and fittings there.
Incidentally, though, fixtures and fittings are actually mostly covered by your buildings insurance. So a lot of people don't realise that, but actually fixed fixtures and fittings, they're all covered under your buildings insurance. So often when you're doing unfurnished properties, you actually don't need unfurnished insurance. And a lot of people actually think they should get that because they've got to cover things like their bathroom, their kitchen, maybe the integrated appliances in their kitchen, maybe even the floor coverings. But sometimes the floor coverings, the curtains, even the garden they've got to trample over to get in there if there's a fire with the fire brigade, can all be covered under most buildings insurance policies, the actual building and not the contents. So sometimes you're actually getting contents and you're not even needing it at all. So just check that out. It's just one that popped into my head and I thought, that's actually a money-saving one for you to do. Now, if you've got 10 properties and it maybe is an extra 50 quid a year, then there's 500 quid that you could use for something else. Go towards something else. Go towards the bathroom you want it to do. Go towards the kitchen you want it to do. The double glazing that I'm doing right now. I mean, I'm doing one now and just ripping it to bits, double glazing. And then I contacted Karen yesterday and I says, look, we're doing the double glazing, we're doing the kitchen, we're doing the bathroom. We've been as well doing the heating system because I know it's an old back boiler, so just change the heating system as well, and carpets and curtains and decorate. And so it'll be mint once I'm finished.
Yeah, she said that to me yesterday, so she's on the case.
Investment, but it's an investment in the future of the stock. And also, and I'll call it out, as Shelter says, bad housing wrecks lives. Yeah. They got a shock when I stood up and said that in one of their conferences. They went, because they were like, what? He agrees with us.
I'm just going to say you're agreeing with us.
What do you think? Private landlords are different people. Do you think we actually think anything different than everybody else? Of course we don't.
Sometimes we look at it like that.
Bad housing, of course, bad housing wrecks lives.
But yeah, no, that's a good example for that one as well. Now, just as we go through this today, I'm going to do a lot of comparisons with like England and Wales and Scotland. It's a good comparison, and it'll make you realise that Scottish legislation and law is a lot different for England, and we've actually got quite a lot more in place. But the next thing I was going to say, like holding deposits is quite a common thing in England. They could take up to 1 week's rent from a prospective tenant to reserve the property as they take references and things, and this must be returned through the rent or the security deposit at the start of the tenancy or refunded if the tenancy doesn't proceed. Now, we don't do that here in Scotland. Jim, you and I were just talking off screen that there may be a way to do that through the deposit scheme.
I think Tenancy Deposit Scotland, which is one of the custodial schemes, which a lot of people actually don't use, which is part of My Deposits, down south, run by Hamilton Fraser. So Hamilton Fraser actually have My Deposits down south. I think they've got Tenancy Deposit Scotland, or possibly just My Deposit Scotland. And I think what they do is an insurance-backed deposit scheme. In other words, you don't. It's something like nobody holds the actual deposit. The owner, the landlord or the letting agent holds the deposit, but it's insurance-backed. So if anything happens with the landlord, the tenant gets their money anyway. So they pay a smaller amount. There's some. I mean, I've never been a big fan of it.
Yeah, we don't use that.
Put your deposit in. Let's put it in the custodial scheme. When it comes to the end, there's no arguments here. Let the custodial scheme decide. But as you've said before, you have to put belts and braces on this to make sure that you've got everything in place to actually prove, because this is effectively a court of law when you come to the end of the tenancy deposit scheme, where you go and the case, if either party disputes, it goes in front of an adjudication panel of professionals, probably ex-solicitors. You have John Blackwood,
which are appointed adjudicators,
the landlords, and people from professional backgrounds who actually adjudicate where the deposit should go back to, or if it should be split, or whatever. Just more or less like a court of law would do. So unless you've got the evidence to present, clear cut, the independent evidence, by the way, not just what you think. It was blue when we moved in. Prove it. Where's your independent report to say it was blue, the wallpaper, when you moved in, or red, or burgundy, or whatever? Because that's a case that T.C. Young was caught out on with a landlord years and years ago, and that's the one I always remember.
And the brand new one,
I mean, a brand new property, and it was all magnolia, the whole lot. And within 3 months, the tenant decided they're moving out, or 6 months, because it was 6 months short of tenants. They decided to move out. All the walls were pink. And then the guy went, "I'm not giving you your deposit back." They took them to the small claims court and says, "I'm getting my deposit back." And the small claims court went, "Well, prove it." We've got no independent report. It was like that when we got it, but prove it. You can't. You couldn't prove it. So basically, what happened is the deposit was returned. You had to give the tenant the deposit. That was it, clear cut. All because they didn't minimise the risk.
And that's why the deposit schemes and things were brought into place, and they serve a really important purpose at the beginning of tenancy and obviously at the end. And that brings us in.
Harsh but fair, and we know that because we've been falling foul of that as well. It's a classic example. If you've used your carpet, if you've had a carpet and you put it in 5 years ago, and the tenant burns the carpet, it's unlikely you're going to get anything towards the carpet at all, because their assumption is carpets will wear in 5 years. So wear and tear minus from there, and then what proportion of the carpet did you burn? You're getting 20 pence or 50 pence back. That's it. That's how they look at it. That's their rules, and I can't disagree with them. It's kind of like a hire car. If you scratch the hire car, they charge you 50 quid for the wee tiny scratch. They'll no say we've got to get the whole lot sprayed again, because you're like, that's unfair. So why should it be any different for the way the deposit schemes run?
Yeah, I do stand by it as a fair system. But what you talk about there brought us on to the next topic, obviously, is what inventories. Inventories, condition reports, like you say, Jim, are important to be carried out. They aren't mandatory, but I mean, always recommend to have one to safeguard you in the situation of a deposit claim. An inventory is a report of the contents and condition of your property at the point of the tenant moving in. Now, these need to be done the day before, or at very latest maybe 2 days before. Don't do it any further back than that, because it'll be open for obviously contest at the end because of the time difference. And it's essential in winning disputes if you're unhappy with how the property has been returned to you when the tenancy ends. You need that evidence to prove what the property was like in the first instance. The tenant agreed to that, and then obviously you need to do that check at the end to show the difference in whether it's wear and tear or whether it's actual damage. So a really important part of a tenancy, and inventory serves a really important purpose. Although, like I say, they aren't mandatory, and some people, well, I don't need an inventory, it's unfurnished. Yes, you do, because they just said your property is still fully fixtures and fittings, and a lot of expensive stuff that could be damaged. So that's one to bear in mind, I think, definitely. The next point is a joint IM and several liability. So, and if you have more than one tenant, they share responsibilities for the property and paying the rent. So obviously we've had, I mean, it's sharers aren't things that we typically do. We've got a couple of students and things that share, obviously 2 students because we don't do HMOs. So if one of your tenants stops paying their bills or their share, then the others are responsible for making up the shortfall. Now this falls into, I mean, this obviously falls into the lines of what England does and what we do slightly differently as well. But sharers and things aren't something that we tend to go down the route of, Jim. We've done it in the past, and you end up with your fingers burnt because one will end up leaving, and then you've got one left who is responsible then for the problem.
Anything about it, one's left. That's the issue.
You're stuck.
And you get, it's great because I've got to say, you do get the single room rent if it's under the housing benefit universal credit rules, and the single room rent for a bed sit is you know, what is it? It's something like 270, 280. Is it, or is it more now? 280?
No, it's more now. It's 300 and
wow.
£302 something.
I think you should start doing joint tenancies for me.
Yeah, well, I'm about to set one up for you.
It's 320 quid. So if you've got a 2-bedroom property and you've got 2 sharers, maybe 2 people that want to share, you've got 640 quid as a contribution towards the rent. And actually, it could help you upgrade the property quicker in terms of what you're doing. The difficulty is you're running 2 sets. You're charging 2 costs, and the cost to set up and the cost of the average time where a tenancy runs and ends probably makes it prohibitive in the first place, and the hassle that happens in between. They do fall out with each other, and I have had it. I've had people who are brother and sister falling out with each other and fighting like cat and dog.
Yeah.
For that very reason. They've both had an allowance. They've moved in. They've just not got on because they've kind of had their separate ways before, and I've tried it time and time again over the years. Try to convince myself everything. You think I would learn, eh? Try to convince myself that it does work and you can make it work, but the reality is it just doesn't work.
I mean, I've been caught with it before, and it's like I say, it's not something that we generally do. I've got one at the moment. They've been with us in another property for a long time. They're older. They're brothers. They've lived together for a long time. And the landlord's selling.
Some don't, but it's very, very rare that can ever happen. The joint several liability thing.
So I think
permitted and prohibited payments. Permitted and prohibited payments. I mean, the Tenancy Fees Act 2018 obviously makes it illegal down in England to charge tenants references, credit checks, and for preparing for a tenancy agreement now, that was a huge hit to people like Foxtons and that. But it's always been in Scotland for a lot of years, since the very beginning. It's been in for about 20 or 30 years, and this has always been here. But it's just that probably it's only been highlighted that you shouldn't have been doing this. Maybe around about 2010 or thereabouts.
Yeah, that's right, because it was around about the time I started doing lettings, and it come in, and it's like you shouldn't really be doing this. So that was
and it is what it is. But you are still allowed to. You're still allowed to charge a nominal fee for admin from a tenant. To be honest, it's not even worth it for the bother. The hassle factor and the turbulence it causes when you get up against this and people start arguing with you saying that's not the case, this is illegal, and it's like, well, it's no, and then try to explain the small print and why it isn't. It's more hassle than it's worth, because the time you spent on trying to convince somebody who then said yes, you've lost that time. And if you're charging what to run a business, it's about 40 or 50 quid an hour. Electricians are like charge you what £100 an hour now, qualified electricians. So you can see how much that costs. So if you're arguing with somebody for an hour, you've lost that money, and you're charging less than that for the nominal fee for the tenant. So it's not worth the bother. So it does make it illegal to charge for references, credit checks, preparing tenancy agreements. However, you can charge for lost keys, amendments to tenancy agreements after it started under the Tenancy Fees Act. Security deposits is another one. You can take up to 5 weeks' rent. 2 months in Scotland, isn't it?
2 months in Scotland. I mean, generally we don't do as much as 2 months. I mean, sometimes we do like a month and a half, depending on circumstances, if there's a pet involved or something. But 2 months plus a month up front sometimes is quite a lot. It's not something that I've generally do, but you can request up to 2 months.
Even the bone of contention for a lot of tenants out there about pets. The government just made it. The government's just like throwing grenades into everything.
I know.
And it's just like, oh no, if you've got a pet, you should have the entitlement to have your pet in your property, regardless what the landlord says. They should have no choice in that. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm spending £100,000 to give you a property at £100,000, and you're greeting to me about an extra deposit of maybe £400 for your pet. Or the fact is, why have I not got the right to refuse someone who I think their pet will damage my property?
I mean,
that's a crazy one, to say that, that's all right then. Oh, but you've got repercussion through the court. If this person is a man of straw or a woman of straw, as they say in law, in other words, they've got no funds or no money, and they're maybe on universal credit, you've got no recourse against them in a court. They've got no money to go after them.
Unmanaged properly.
And this is where it comes on the vulnerable. They're putting legislation in place to do things like this, and everybody's going, oh, rah, it's great, tenants' laws. It's like the vulnerable suffer as a result of it. Because it's the vulnerable, it can't afford it, or the person of straw, it has no recourse against that. They then don't reference up properly because they don't have the creditworthiness to do that or accommodate that at the end. Therefore, the landlord doesn't take them. So it's the vulnerable that suffer because of the legislation from the government, the Scottish government, I might add.
Yeah, I would agree.
Oh, by the way, join the Scottish Association of Landlords. I've put the joining link in this post. I make no money from this, by the way. There's no kickback. Just about transparency here. I do think this is all about safety in numbers. We need some sort of union to represent us as private landlords to stand up against our government, who's completely draconian towards what we do. They have no idea what we do, actually. I wish they'd spend some time with me for a change and really see what it's like to be a private landlord and care about the people that have actually got a roof over their head from you. I think that's the most important thing they should understand and live from day to day and understand that. There's too many career politicians out there that just want to make a name for themselves, and they just throw grenades in all the time thinking this is going to make, I'm going to be popular because of this, and I'm going to get voted in because of this. But the repercussions that you're doing on the most vulnerable people in our society are immense. Anyway, that's my bit.
No, you're fine. And SAL as well, Jim, is a really good source of information and things for landlords to keep up to date. So I mean, it's a good source of info, and join that for obviously being part of that bigger part of the rental sector, like you say, Jim. Tenancy deposit schemes as well, as we already touched on. The mandatory government schemes requires landlords to register and protect any security deposit, like say if it's a month, if it's 2 months, whatever, with the deposit for the duration of the tenancy and any deposits that they receive. And that needs to be lodged within the 90 days of the first start date of the tenancy. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
As with any profession,
though, when you think about it, having to handle on the vocabulary will help you sound like a real professional and meet your obligations to run a successful business. Can I cover the next one about preparing tenancy agreements? And you could just jump in, yeah?
Yeah.
A legal enforceable tenancy agreement is not only essential to give you the full protection of the law, for what we've got of it, it will also be a condition of the rent protection insurance or a buy-to-let mortgage. It's essential that you put that in place because it is a condition of these things.
Yeah.
Here's some common tenancy terminology for England, Scotland, and Wales. Pretty universal today. Not just concentrating on Fife.
I think it's important to see the difference between.
Assured short hold tenancies are a standard type of tenancy agreement in England and Wales, with a guaranteed right for the landlord to reclaim possession at the end of the tenancy agreement. This is the no-fault eviction, which we used to have in Scotland, which was actually removed. Now, no-fault eviction, I've got to say, was a good thing to a degree because it wasn't confrontational when you did this. The difficulty with the current system we've got just now, the PRT in Scotland, the Private Residential Tenancy Agreement, is you've got to find a ground to actually serve the notice on. And while we all have good reasons, sometimes the ground that you want to serve the notice on is not the ground you really want to talk about with the tenant. And I mean like antisocial behaviour, or they're damaging your property. That's the sort of things you want to avoid, because then if you say antisocial behaviour, then they're arguing with you and they're almost in a fight with you, which proves straight away it's antisocial behaviour.
Yeah.
That's the difficulty out of that, I would say. So the short-term tenancy was brilliant. It lasted for 6 months. It lasts for 6 months. It runs on periodically thereafter, or you can open it up so it runs on permanently thereafter. You can give 2 months' notice either side of that, but you have to serve the proper notices. The break clause, typically assured short-hold tenancies of a year or more, a break clause allows the landlords to end the tenancy contract from an agreed point before the initial term ends by giving usually the 2 months' notice. Has to be done properly though, doesn't it? Has to be an 85 or a section, whatever it is now down south. The Non-Housing Act tenancy. This is another one. Residential tenancies which don't meet the criteria of the Housing Act 1988 are known as Non-Housing Act tenancies. Examples include company lets or renting rooms to lodgers. There's also another one, the periodic tenancy. In England and Wales, it's a assured short-hold tenancy automatically becomes a periodic tenancy if it runs beyond the original term, which is what I talked about. Now, under Scottish law, it used to be tacit relocation. It just runs on. There's the private residential tenancy, which is in Scotland. The PRT it's shortened to. Now, you can get a standard PRT from the Scottish Association of Landlords, so you can download it, or you can get it from the Scottish Government. And then what you do is you keep it as it is in the body, because that's the minimum you need to have in it. And then you can add the conditions in of the contractual agreement, although it doesn't stand up when it comes to giving notice or anything like that. It just gives you a contractual agreement. For example, one of them is you can use the deposit as a rent, can't you? Mm-hmm. Now, that's not in the PRT, is it? You could add that in, though, and if you add it into your tenancy agreement, at the end of the tenancy, if you've not got it added in, by the way, and you have the deposit and you've got rent outstanding, if you then apply to the tribunal, ask for it back as part of the rent, the tribunal say, well, it's not in your tenancy agreement, so we can't do that by law. If it is in your tenancy agreement and you can offset it, yes. If it is in your tenancy agreement, you can offset it against the rent, the deposit. If there's no damage, by the way, then that's perfectly legal to do that because it's in the tenancy agreement. So that's probably one of the things, the top tips I would give for the PRT. And that came in December 2017. They're open-ended. They'll last until the tenant wishes to leave, or the landlord gives one or more of the 18 grounds for eviction, which are becoming more and more discretionary now rather than mandatory. It's almost getting to the point where it's like, you're supposed to give it has to be 6 months rent in arrears before you can actually do anything. But I believe it's now discretionary whether the actual tribunal decides whether you've got just grounds, even though it's 6 months. I mean, how on earth anybody can survive just with one or two properties and say you've got 6 months rent in arrears, and then you've got to apply to the tribunal with a 6 month rent in arrears, and then that's going to take another 3 or 4 months. And then by the time it's heard, it's another 6 months down the line. You've got a tenant never paying rent for the whole year, which is on average rent. Just on average rent in Fife is around about £500, £550. Yeah. So you're talking about you're £6,000 out of pocket. You're still having to pay the insurance. You're still having to pay the repairs. You're still having to pay the mortgage if you've got it on it. And you're supposed to be able to survive like that. That's just not right at all. There's a complete imbalance in the legislation of how that happens. And that's what needs to be equalised again. That needs to be turned around. It was fair before. It was 3 months before. The grounds were a lot better. It was a lot easier to take action if you needed to. And then that's when it could have been discretionary at that point.
Yes.
Discretionary then could have been left under the 3 months notice, and then the tribunal could have decided on a discretionary basis if you've got really just grounds to do it. If the person says, look, I'm paying my rent now from the 3 months onwards, and I've only ever been 3 months in arrears, and I'm now paying my rent, and I've shown a track record, the housing panel could turn around and say, well, there's no grounds for eviction here, because if it's only on the 3 months arrears, and you've compartmentalized, that's it. Hey, I got there.
I couldn't think what you were trying to say.
The actual the 3 months in arrears, and they're paying the rent from then on. As a commercial reality as well, why would you want to put them out then? Because they're still paying the rent every month thereafter. They've only 3 months in arrears. You put that person out after the 3 months or after the 6 months, and if they are still paying the rent, I could see the point of this. If they are still paying the rent every single month thereafter, then you're going to put somebody out. You're going to probably have to wait for the void in between, and then you're going to have to wait to refurb the property because it's not going to be in the exact condition it was in before, which is going to leave you in the position. It's like you're going to be worse off. Oh, but I've got to get against it. No, but if the tenant couldn't afford it and there was a problem here, then maybe that is the case.
I think the point is, if you get the tenant back on track and they're paying their rent again,
what we do.
Then, yeah, I think it's best to work together, move forward, rather than...
absolutely. I've got some like that already. I've got some that have been with me for years, in Glenrothes. 2 of them in Glenrothes that have been with me for years. They're probably about 6 or 7 months outstanding, maybe even a year outstanding in rent, possibly. It doesn't bother me if they're paying their rent from then on, and it's the reason it's because it's built up over the years because they've been falling on hard times every now and again. And I'm like, well, that's okay with me. I'm fine with that. It's like it's difficult for you to sort yourself out, but you're back on track again. That's okay with me. I'm fine with that. Oh, is that a caring landlord?
I'm trying to think.
Do these people exist? Of course they do. The majority of landlords, private landlords, are like that. Every single time they'll take a decision. I'd said to someone the other day, being a private landlord is not for the faint-hearted. You have got to be prepared to give up your holiday, to give up your new car, to give up your house move potentially, and to take the hit yourself in order to look after the tenant. It is a legal responsibility and it's a duty. And you have a duty of care to them. To look after them while they're in that property, and it's a moral duty as well, more than anything. So when it comes to if the heating breaks down and the engineer turns round and says the heating system's obsolete now, we need to replace the whole thing and it's going to cost you £4,000, and you go, oh, I can't afford to do that. They'll just have to wait. However, I'm going to go on holiday. It's like no. Your holiday goes first. Your holiday gets taken, your tenant gets looked after first, I mean, and you forgo your holiday. That's what being a private landlord is. Anyway, let's go into keeping your rental property legal.
No, that was a good rundown. The differences in tenancies between, obviously, Scotland and England and things. And the PRT, like you say, Jim, does have the clauses in it that need to be, they're fixed, but you can add and edit certain ones. But the grounds are changing to discretionary now, so it's kind of open for interpretation on whatever grounds you serve the notice on. But moving on to keeping your rental property legal, which is so important. Before you move any tenant in to a rental property, you need to meet specific health and safety standards to avoid hefty fines, a criminal record, and even imprisonment. And people maybe shrug that off and think, no, that would never happen. Yes, it can. And some of the most important ones I'm going to cover just now. And I think the most important one is gas safety checks or gas safety check records. A gas safety check must be carried out on an annual basis by a registered gas engineer. And it's gas safe now. It's not Corgi anymore. It's gas safe registered. Yeah. And that's on every rental property. And it must have the supporting document and show that the property has passed and that the gas boiler and any other gas appliances have been checked for that year. And that is the most...
A copy given to the tenant, A copy given to the tenant before they leave, or from the letting agent after that. Here's a newsflash for landlords out there. If your gas safety check isn't in place, and it's very, very rare this happens, and your tenant was to die in that property because of the heating system, this is for any landlord, even a social landlord. The landlord's going to jail. It's not the letting agent. Your letting agent doesn't have any. Your letting agent can't be held. It won't be held accountable. The law actually specifically says it's you as the landlord. It's your responsibility as the landlord. And so if your tenant dies in that property, this is called corporate manslaughter, and you are going to jail more than likely for corporate manslaughter. Equally as well, I don't understand why some of the housing association or the council, heads, the Hedons, have actually not gone or taken some accountability, because the buck stops with them and it's their responsibility as well. And we know in social housing that that's actually happened. Do you notice on the news how they talk about landlords when they're supposed to be talking about social landlords? For the recent cases about the mold and stuff like that all the time. Everything on the BBC News, it's landlords, and I thought, excuse me, it's no private landlords, it's social landlords that are this problem. I've been in a lot of social landlords' houses over the years because I do that as a wee ready reckoner and walk round to see where that person's living. It comes to apply to us, and I tell you what, some of them are appalling. Some of them don't even have things that you're going to talk about right here in place.
I've noticed that over the years as well.
And yet they tell you how social they are and how they look after their tenants. And I'll guarantee you, maybe we should do this as a show. Maybe we should actually visit people's social housing landlord properties and actually do proper investigations, almost like a dispatches, or like like a panorama or something like that, and actually investigate social landlords and actually look at their stock and look at how compliant these are with the law and what they're doing about their tenants in these properties, and actually run a show like that. Wouldn't that be great? This is a wee pet project for me on retirement. It's like I'm up for this. This is what this is maybe all leading to. All these thousands of hours I'm doing on channels like this. It's all leading to this communation of being a Roger, Roger. God, I can't mind Roger's name. I used to do all investigative series years and years ago. And then what's it? Michael McIntyre? No, Michael McIntyre, but you know the boy I'm thinking about. He's Irish, and he does the investigative series as well. Maybe this is where this is leading for me, because I can't stand the fact that other people are getting castigated. A group of private landlords are getting castigated in the whole of the country, in the whole of the UK, and you've got all these social landlords, thinking they're whiter than white and going, that's terrible. That's disgusting behaviour. And it's like, holy shit, these people are more accountable than us. You're worse than us, and nobody sees this because the media doesn't want to portray this picture.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's go on. Electrical safety standards.
Yeah. So gas safety is a really important one, but electrical safety, rental homes in Scotland must have an electrical safety check by a registered engineer every 5 years. It's called an EICR, which is an electrical installation condition report. Like I say, that's every 5 years, and that covers all your sockets and your RCD board, which is your consumer unit.
Thank you, Father of Wisdom on TikTok, Roger Cook. Roger Cook. Well done, pal.
It's no relation, by the way.
Roger Cook was my greatest inspiration, I've got to say. At 16 years old, I remember watching the Cook Report, and it was in London where they had the slum landlords at that time. Some of them were really bad. Yeah. And he took them round these properties, and he looked at these properties in his investigative series, and there was cockroaches running everywhere when you opened the cupboard in the kitchen and stuff like that. Oh, it was disgusting. But I tell you what I heard on that show that day, when I looked at that, when I looked at these properties, they said, and what are you paying every month in rent? And they went, £1,000. And I went, what? At 16 years old, I thought £1,000 for a property for a month in London at that time. Now, even £1,000.
See, that's quite high for back then.
You're even that's even more. And this is in the 1980s. Yeah. And I'm thinking, good grief, I could do a better job than that. And it was only till about 10 years later that I thought, right, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to do it right. And I'm going to blaze a trail forward and have charter mark landlords, have approved landlords by the government and stuff like that. So this is why kind of landlord accreditation all came about, because I came together with Sal at that time, with John Blackwood, with Stephen Peasnell, and we were all individual units of landlord associations and formulated a way forward for landlords to follow. And this is where it's all evolving. Unfortunately, we're trying to do this voluntarily, where the government says, no, we're throwing a spanner in the works all the time with the legislation. That's the difficulty we've got to face. Anyway.
Things like that have obviously, it's just another seed and planted in your mind throughout your journey. If people follow the Wealth Creation Show, we're doing your property investment journey, and I've noticed throughout that you say, and there's certain things that have planted the seed that have made you take the path which has got you down, obviously, property investing and being a landlord.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's you know what I love being a landlord. It's the moral obligation of looking after someone else. I don't know what it is, but it's just the fulfillment you get from that, and helping someone else on their journey, and helping someone else to the next stage if they need to be helped. You can't help everybody. You can't help somebody that doesn't want to be helped. You know, we've got a classic example recently of we're having to go through eviction with one of our tenants, but we got her back on track. We got the rent arrears all sorted out, and it was given to her, unfortunately, and she spent the lot.
She spent it, yeah.
Knowing full well that that money was meant to go to us to actually cover all our rent arrears from an agency who's actually out there as support and help for her. We got her all that help and support to keep her in her tenancy, and lo and behold, spent the lot. And we're a year down the road. The tribunal has accepted the fact that it's definitely going. I think that's the case. There's no way they're ever going to turn around and say, well, she spent the lot deliberately. She actually admitted that. And we are down there. Now, think about other landlords that would be in this position. And I've got the great grace. It doesn't affect my other stock. Therefore, I'm still able to look after my other tenants for that reason. Whereas a landlord that has one or two properties would be goosed. They wouldn't even be able to look after their other stock. They wouldn't have the money to do it. So that's why it's important to make sure that you get all this right in the first place, and you get the right referencing, you get all the legislative requirements you cover as well. This is why it's important to use a letting agent, for God's sake. And now, no letting agent that starts up tomorrow and says, "Oh, I'm a letting agent." It's like, no, you've got to please do your due diligence for the right letting agent, for God's sake. Make sure they've got a track record at this. Make sure they eat their own cooking.
Yeah, and I would say as well, if you're hiring a letting agent, don't be scared to spear them. I mean, ask them other questions and see if they've got the answers. And if they don't, then you maybe not got the right.
It's a great phrase I learned from Keith Cunningham, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He's Rich Dad. Keith Cunningham. Keys for the Vault, by the way, if you want to look him up. A great lesson. He says, make sure you've got someone that eats their own cooking. Yeah. And sticks to their knitting. In other words, they do this day in, day out. That's why you have specialists. That's why the overall picture I get involved in like this, Richard, but the day-to-day running the business now in the lettings division, I've got no involvement in that anymore. But I wouldn't know where to start. I was wanting to do Letwell again, and I was originally one of the first qualified as a Letwell letting agent, but I can't afford the time to do that anymore, and that's why you guys are doing it. I realise though the importance of doing this, and I do keep myself abreast on a summary scale of what the legal requirements are. So I understand it completely. It's just that I don't go through all the rigmarole. I haven't sit the exams anymore.
It's time consuming, and like I say, it's my job. It's a full-time job.
So electrical
safety. Something that goes hand in hand with that is smoke alarms. Your electrician will do that for you as well. Every rental property must have working smoke alarms on each floor and in every room. Your main living area and each floor, and heat detectors in your kitchen area. Landlords must ensure that they provide confirmation of where the smoke alarms are and that they're all in working order. Your smoke alarms, they'll be valid for 10 years if they're put in. Now, originally when the electrical safety legislation in Scotland came in 2017. Smoke alarms that were put in then were all hardwired. We went through all that. So they'll still be valid at the moment, but new legislation says that now we could have the long life lithium battery smoke alarms which are interlinked. So you don't need all the wiring and things, which is good now for landlords, but the ones that went through
that teaches me to wait until the legislation's properly in before you do anything. Because I've done it. I've gone and did all the hardwired, disrupted all the skirtings and facings and cornices and everything like that to get hardwired all the way through, because that was the requirement. And now it's like, I can put battery up as long as they're interlinked 10-year lithium sealed batteries. Yep. Hello? What? I spent a fortune putting these in, about 500 or 600 quid a house. And now you can do it for a couple of hundred quid. Same with the electrical boxes. You know, I put all the metal ones in. They went, no, I've changed their mind. You can change it back to composite. I had them all in. And you got me to change them at 500 or 600 quid a pop. It was about £30,000.
The goalposts have changed quite a lot with the electrical safety legislation. Even the wiring and things is all changed now as well. But anyway, make sure you've got a good qualified, select registered electrician to do that for you.
That's a ticking time bomb when you think about it for landlords, is the electrical safety. It's going to come round, guys. If you've got your electrical safety certificate coming out soon, you're gonna have more stringent requirements. You're going to have to do additional bonding. You're going to have to do additional wiring. That's just the standards upgraded now for the electrical safety standards. So 5 years ago, you won't pass now. So you will have to make sure you've got money aside for your properties to make sure that you can actually get the electrical safety standards through. That brings us nicely onto the EPCs, though.
Yeah, EPCs, an EPC rate for a property's performance is usually on a scale from A, well, it is on a scale from A to G, A being the best. Rental homes must have a rating of at least an E. By 2025, we're going to be a minimum of a C for any new tenancies. In existing tenancies, will have to be a minimum of C by 2028. Yeah. That's how it stands at the moment. I don't see it changing, but that's how it is.
I think that can's going to get kicked down the road still. I don't think we're going to be in that position to still be there to do that. Most people will do it though as normal changeover, because you can see with yourself. I've got a boiler which is a bad boiler. Immediately, I'm just saying, look, just change it now.
You know,
so I'm feeding my maintenance program, and I'm making sure my maintenance programs are a perpetual maintenance program. It's ongoing all the time, so I don't get hit for this big massive hit when the EPCs come in to say you've got to have a minimum requirement of EFG or whatever it is, and I'm like, I'm only on B, wherever it is, and I've then got to look at all these properties and think I've got to spend at least £5,000 on every single one. That would then go, oh yeah, boy, that would be 300,000.
Multiply up.
I saw your face there when it's like when you said, "Oh my God, 300,000." You're not kidding. It's a lot of money.
But yeah,
so
I mean, EPC.
That's why I spend so much. That's why I'm spending and investing. I'm not spending really. You're investing. That's why I'm investing a lot. This is all about. This is why you make profit, to reinvest back in the business. This is why I'm investing the profit I've made, the majority of profit I've made, and upgrading the stock to make sure we're compliant by the time it hits. And over natural time, you will do that anyway. For example, when the boiler breaks, it's now obsolete. Well, just change it for a new condenser combi boiler. And that's fine. And that's that taken care of. Your EPC now goes up as a result of that. So when it comes round to the minimum standards for EPC, you're like, quids in. I don't really need to do that much.
I've heard whispers of the minimal EPC for C 2025 being pushed to 2026, but I mean, I don't know if that'll happen. But like you say, it'll get kicked down the road. The can for that one.
Now, I would say for the EPCs though, just to explain to everybody, the EPCs, if you can demonstrate it's prohibitive for you to upgrade to the C level when you're renting your property, then there is a dispensation in the legislation for that. And what I mean by that is it's the old cottages, the old farm cottages. Yeah. They're stone built. There's no way you could insulate them properly. In terms of getting it up to the EPC rating up, there's some places you can only have propane or oil, which could be a big difference as well. Mm-hmm. And in order to get that up, you might have to put a ground source heat pump in, which is like £20,000.
Yeah, they're a lot.
And that's the example where it's in situations as the one-offs like that, where the legislation would say, look, you're at an EPC D. There's no way you can get to a C without a huge amount of spend, and it is prohibitive. So we'll give you a dispensation on that. In other words, a pass. Pass go through as you go, basically. So there is information about that, and you could talk to people about that if anybody wants to know about that, Richard. So just contact Richard if you can. If you need more information, contact Richard. Richard's got an easy email address. It's richard@fifeproperties.co.uk or richard.cook@fifeproperties.
Either or will come to me.
Yeah, either or will go to you anyway.
And if you look at the blog, my contact details are in here as well for this show.
Okay.
EPC certificates are valid for 10 years once they're carried out. So, I mean, do it right at the point of doing that. And if you could get it to a C, then you've got that for 10 years. Now, although this could all seem a bit boring and time consuming, remember that the law is there to protect everyone, including the landlord, not just the tenant. A safe property means less risk of accidents and liabilities, while the energy efficient home will always be more popular and attract higher rents. Yep. And that's really the case at the moment. The amount of tenants that look at energy efficiency rating when they're looking for a property is quite surprising now. So
I'm going to say a quick to the TikTok and Instagram.
Yeah.
If you want to ask any questions later on, please feel free to ask them. If you want to ask questions in here as well, please feel free to ask questions, and we could answer all the questions at the end if you want. We're more than happy to do that. We've got a script for the show. We run through the script, as you can see here. Most people will see. So we basically run with the script now. We'll obviously put our own personal perspective on this, which is why I'm talking about other things outside of this.
Yeah.
But we have to answer questions at the end. So if you need to go, you'll get the questions at the end. We'll answer them. So we'll look at the comments. Okay.
So next one is obviously taking up references and things, and thorough referencing is such a crucial part of setting up a tenancy to ensure that your tenant and any guarantors, if you've got them in place, are suitable candidates and financially able to pay the rent. And there's a few steps in this process which obviously make up the entire referencing step of a tenancy. First off, credit checks, a report on a potential tenant's credit history, including any late payments, default notices like county court judgments, usually carried out by an external agency. You need the tenant's written consent to do this, obviously, first, and we get them to fill out applications and things to do that. But the credit check is an important part of this referencing step.
You'll be amazed at how many credit check companies actually give you different information. And I only know that because before I apply for lending from a corporate bank or anything like that, if I'm doing any projects, I just check my credit file beforehand, and you get an option to check 3 different files, and they have 3 different opinions on you, and they have 3 different information that they can give over about you. So it depends on what type of credit check you're getting in order to get that right thing. Now, I think we've got it sussed where we get the right information, as much information as possible, which gives us a good amount of feedback. But that's not the only thing we will check. What are the other things that we'll check?
Yeah, so I mean, your proof of income is an important thing. Confirmation from a tenant's employer or their work of what their income is, often backed up with 3 or possibly even 6 month pay slips if they have that for. And for self-employed tenants, get an accountant's reference or their latest tax return and or 3 or 6 months bank statements to review as well. Just so you could basically prove that they are being quite transparent about what their income is.
It's really important, Richard. Here's one key to know you've maybe not got the right person applying for the property. If they object to this at this point in time and don't say a reason why, it's a red flag to you straight away. Don't try and accommodate this. If they're saying, why do you need to know all this? It's like, well, I'm giving you a house that's possibly £100,000. What are you giving me? A deposit of £500, essentially. And you're just going to get a £100,000 house just like that. Of course, I want to know if you can back that up. So there is requirements under data protection, and that's what having the right referencing forms to get that data is important about. And it's all about compliance. And as a compliance officer for the company, who I am under data protection, then I have to make sure that system's in place in order to comply with the legislation. A lot of private landlords don't know that, because they don't use letting agents. So they just ask for that information, but they're actually not compliant with the law.
Yeah. I mean, income, I was just going to say, income, obviously, a guarantor is a good thing as a backup. If people's income maybe is slightly under, or maybe they're just on the cusp, but you think, look, they could be a really good tenant, but you need that extra security, then a guarantor is someone who's prepared to guarantee the rent payments if the tenant cannot pay. A guarantor should also go through the income and credit check process as well.
And this is where the guarantors we have to insist on now, even for people that are vulnerable. We've got no choice. The government's backed us into a corner and put legislation in place which makes it absolutely impossible, if anything goes wrong, for us to remove the tenant without actually incurring possibly 12 months loss of rent. For example, what's happened recently for me. So basically I'm 12 months down, and that's fine. I can take that hit. A single landlord on their own with 1 or 2 properties can't take that. So more or less now, what it's done is it's caused a problem, and the most vulnerable in our society have actually suffered as a result of it. And homelessness has actually gone up to a record level for the first time. It's at a record level with this presiding government. And did you know there's actually the Thatcher government built more social housing in Scotland than the current government has since 2009.
I didn't know that. That's quite. I mean, I was going to say that's surprising, but maybe
They
it's not.
built 12% more social housing under the Thatcher government than the current SNP Green administration has done for the last since 2009.
Here's an
Oh my
interesting fact.
God. How
Yeah.
embarrassing is that? They are
Yeah.
presiding over the highest homelessness rate ever. And this is because of legislation and the draconian legislation they put in place. And private landlords are exiting like there's no tomorrow. And not even sitting on their hands and not even buying property to help people out now. And this is another sign as well, is the fact that we've had to put guarantors on every single person. And somebody on universal credit really can't get a guarantor because if anything happens, and not from the tenant's point of view, if anything happens, if universal credit turn around one day and say, we're not paying anymore, we've had it. We've got somebody in a property we've got no recourse against because they've got nothing. And that is the difficulty. They've only built, incidentally as well, just to jump back to the social housing issue, do you know since 2009, the Scottish government, in the whole of Scotland, where there's 6 million people, the Scottish government's only built 5,000 houses, social houses, every year? 5,000 for the whole of Scotland every year for the last 11 years.
Did you think it was as low as that?
I thought it'd be just 5,000 for Fife, let alone the whole of Scotland. What record is that? That's appalling. Maybe they should focus on things more important in our society than the things that they're maybe focused on right now.
Yeah.
Like a roof over people's heads.
Yeah, I would totally agree.
After them. Like the proper accommodation. Do you think putting private landlords off is going to help homelessness or is going to hinder homelessness?
Definitely going to hinder it.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't get it. There's no joined up thinking up here. They don't see the bigger picture, how this all fits in on a long-term scale. They should have been building social housing years ago. And I'm not talking about housing associations. I'm talking about the government. I'm talking about the councils. They should have given them a funding for this. I've seen the deprivation over the years in the funding for the councils and the lack of funding in order to build housing, social housing, for them, specifically for them, and how they've been denied it all these years. We've not got the money. We've not got the money. But you'll spend money on needless crap that you're looking to do elsewhere. And it's not really important at this point in time. Not as important as a roof over somebody's head. It's homeless and looking after them and giving them the social care they need in order to get them back on track. But hey ho, let's go and talk about things that are pie in the sky. It's not really that relevant just now. It makes my blood boil, Richard. It does make my blood boil.
I know. We could see that. I know, but I totally agree.
Garden tours. We're going to overrun the hour anyway, so we can keep going because we're live streaming on everything anyway.
So yeah, we've covered garden tours. Also, identity check, and people might think, well, obviously you can include things like photo ID and passports and driver's license, and proof of address and things as well, just to obviously check who somebody is, who they say they are. Now, you might think that's silly, but then you could have somebody standing in front of you, and they might not actually be who they say they are. So it is really important to check that, and the best way to do that is passport or driver's license.
You're talking to a master at this. I could do this quite easily. I've seen this all over the years where people have actually put a different photograph on their passport and actually scanned it and sent it over to you as if it's a real one. And it's actually a different photograph on it because it's a scan. You don't realise, so you have to see the original. Even the original could be tampered with. These are the things that you've got to do. And then the credit check, obviously, we're going through backs up the identity, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, and it also then it locates the previous addresses and things, and then proof of your current address through a bank statement, utility bill, or some sort of membership or something. Not mobile phone bills. They are not accepted.
This is how they get ghost tenants down in England. It happens quite a lot. Paul Champolin, our friend, Paul, does it on landlords, nightmares and tenants and all the rest of it on Channel 5. And you'll see loads of shows there. Incidentally, this isn't a representation of the true private rented sector. It's only the one-offs that you see for TV. But Paul does it, and there's people that move into properties, and they're not even the same person as actually who they said they were. They find this out later on, and then they find out the referencing wasn't done properly in the beginning, and the checks hadn't been done in order to happen because the landlord thought they could move them in, and then that's that tenant in with the bricks, because it takes ages to get somebody out now. You can't really get them out that easily. And long gone are the days of the Rachmans and the Van Hoosenfelds. We just turned up and says, right, that's you out. It's time to leave. You just can't do that. That's not That's not appropriate, especially for somebody that's actually trying to get themselves back on track. You know, and then I can go on forever about this. Let's move on.
Okay. Landlord references as well. That is a really important one. A statement from a tenant's existing landlord confirming whether the rent they have paid has been paid on time. And
well looked after. I tell you what, though, if the landlord wants rid of them, I used to think if they're wanting rid of them, they'll just give them a good reference, won't they?
Yeah,
in order to get them moved. I've seen that happen. I've caught landlords out with that. They've said, "Oh, no, yeah, they're good and all the rest of it," and then I found out they've no paid their rent just because I've started to quiz the tenant a bit more and got their guard down, and then realised it's like, wait a minute, you've not been paying your rent. And it's like, and I'm thinking they've just been at it to try and get rid of them because they don't want to go through the hassle of eviction. So they've just been saying, "Oh yeah, they've paid the rent on time. They're a really good tenant," and then they've just lumped them onto someone else. That's what they do. Now, there is legislation. There is legislation that actually says if you give the wrong reference, if you give a reference which is deliberately malicious and manipulated and lying fundamentally under law, then you are liable for any repercussions that happens to that tenant, the person that you give the tenant the reference to. And I know that because when I did legislation at college. In my accountancy course, we did business law, and that actually came up as one where someone gave an employer's reference to a bank, and it was falsified, and they had to pay the repercussions of giving that false one for them for that false reference. So we're very, very careful about the references we give. Sometimes we actually don't give a reference at all, but that obviously tells you straight away that if we're not giving a reference, there's something wrong. Because I won't give a reference to say the tenant's absolutely appalling and don't pay their rent on time and they're antisocial and all the rest of it. Because the first thing I found when I used to do that, when I used to speak to another landlord, to go straight to the tenant and confront them with it. And then they would come back to me and say, "You told them." It's like, but you are. But then you're at fighting talk at that time. So that's why I used to just refuse giving a reference. And that I used to say to them, that'll tell you everything, the very fact I'm refusing.
Like you say, it's interesting. Over the years, I've actually had agents give me references, glowing references, which were untrue. I mean, that's not something common that's happened, but it has happened in the past.
So it's just to try and get rid of them, isn't it?
Yeah.
Getting the right help. Can I cover this one? Not everyone actually needs a managing agent, and if you're a full-time professional landlord and an experienced team around you, a tenant finding service may be all you need for some people. We've actually stopped doing tenant finding service because it's not economic and it's not cost effective. But we can still give you advice on what to do and how to do that yourself if that's what you want to do. But if you're busy elsewhere or you prefer a more hands-off, here's a quick rundown of the different levels of services letting agents actually provide. Your let only, which is basically your agent carries out the viewings, finds a tenant, takes the references, prepares your tenancy agreement and inventory, and then hands you everything over to you for you when the tenant moves in. That's it, done and dusted. You've also got the rent collection service as well. So rent collection service is it's including everything from the let only option that we just spoke about. This service covers taking over the rent collection as well, and chasing up late payments and getting things back on track. To be honest, Richard, it's something we don't do either, and it's for the fact that I know if we do the rent collection service, we'll end up doing a fully managed.
You won't end up just collecting the rent. You end up doing
because I can't just let our reputation sink on the fact that we're only collecting the rent and turn around and someone says, "But you only got us to collect the rent," when it's actually going pear-shaped maybe, or we need to get a tenant back on track. It's then left to us to do that, and it's like, well, wait a minute, we're full management then we're doing now, and you're actually getting away with paying rent collection. So the full management is really what we do, and the full management agent handles everything, including safety checks for gas, electricity, smoke alarms, repairs, improvements, emergencies, mid-tenancy inspections, dealing with disputes, serving notice. Geez, dealing with disputes. Wow. That eats up all your time. Serving notice and helping you get your property back. Hence the reason why we want to find the best tenants, because we don't want to deal with disputes further down the line. Why on earth would an agency want to take on a tenant? It could be problematic and show signs of problematic in the beginning, if it's going to lead to having all these disputes further down with their neighbours, with the tenant themselves, with their partners, maybe even with their entourage that comes with them. Because a lot of them, butter wouldn't melt in their mouth, if you remember that expression. And then they move in and the entourage appears. And then you go, oh my God.
That's
Recently in one of mine, butter wouldn't have melted in his mouth. He was in one of their other properties and says, look, we can downsize you to this one, move it to that one. The entourage appeared. I don't know why, because they weren't at the other one anyway, but they obviously appeared. Maybe it was a jealousy thing, and they thought, we'll just destroy your property so you lose your tenancy. And that's effectively what they did. That's what happened. Again, I come back to saying, I can take that hit. Get the proper insurance for it as well. That's important.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I meant that.
Yeah. And that makes sure that's happened. And that's taken care of as well. I mean, we do a lot of stuff. I'll be honest, Richard, and I've told you about this before. Will you stop doing these things? Because that is not part of a full management service. That is an additional cost. And you're doing all these things for free. And we can't run a business for free on fresh air. It's something that we do, though, isn't it? Just to make sure. And a lot of people don't realise that's what happens.
It's hard for me sometimes to look at a situation and think, well, that's, I mean, the worst response. That's not my job, or that's not for me to do. Do you know what I mean? When I know,
you know, by you stepping in, the tenant's well-being will be looked after.
Yeah.
Just by you stepping in, and even though the landlord doesn't want to pay for that, by you stepping in, that protects the tenant more than anything. And there is times where I've actually stepped in myself and I actually advised the tenant what to do, and then they've taken the landlord to task. And I'll be open and honest about that. That's only 1 or 2 times in the whole 30 years I've actually been doing this. I've had to do that because I felt that the landlord wasn't living up to the legal obligations under the Tenant Repair and Improvement Act. And I think that was the most important thing to do, to advise the tenant on what they should be doing. So it works both ways. We will look after the tenant's interests just as much as we will look after the landlord's. We're primarily there to look after the landlord's interests, and this is what we do. But on obligations of sometimes once in a blue moon, well, we will look after the tenant's interests for that very reason, because we don't want to see that happen to them. So full management service encompasses everything and anything. And I tell you, it's worth its weight in gold for somebody that's a professional. Or somebody that's not hands-on and doesn't want to learn the legislation back to front, over the 150 pieces of legislation. When it goes wrong for them horribly as well, they've got somebody else who can step in and do that for them. That's what we do. We solve these problems. It's more or less, I usually say to most people, you think it's all going swimmingly well and you think, oh, maybe I should take it back because it's all going well. I should maybe just take my property back. But what you're actually paying for us is an insurance policy. This is an insurance as to when it really goes disastrously wrong. You can guarantee that we'll spend a huge amount of hours sorting this out, as opposed to the nominal paltry 50 or 60 quid you maybe paid us for the month to look after that. That's the reality. This is an insurance policy to make sure you've got the right people in the right place for when things do go wrong. That's why you have a letting agent. For when it goes horribly wrong, you know somebody can actually solve this problem as quick as possible and get down that avenue and get that resolution. Rather than having somebody that goes, I'm not really sure what to do. Have it back.
Yeah, I think it's important.
That's when they come to us, isn't it? And then they come to us and go, it's all going disastrously wrong. I went, well, you should have picked us in the first place. And I am not. And by the way, we are not solving your problem for you. We'll point in the right direction and tell the right people to go to, but you should have come to us in the first place if that was the case. And a lot of people do then begin to realise that and go elsewhere. It's like, the grass is always greener. We've had that as well. If people think the grass is always greener, it's like, you're just not running my property right. This is once in a blue moon as well. But then they leave somebody, they go to somebody else and they think, oh my God, you guys were blooming geniuses at doing what you were doing.
As the thing, like, the grass isn't always greener sometimes, and I've had that on occasion. But I mean, I think the important thing is
here, and I'll come back, and I'm going to blow one trumpet here, Richard. You've got somebody here that's got a track record in this for 30 years, is still actively investing right now, still at the forefront of housing politics in Scotland, still got the finger on the pulse about everything. You've got a team that backs all that up as well. Where you're yourself, Richard, you've learned from me all these years, and you still learn. This is why you do the shows with me right now, to learn every single time and improve your skills every single time. You've not got anybody like that in the whole of Scotland, if not the whole of the UK.
Yeah, I've yet to see agents do what we do up here.
It's the experience and track record that you pay for. It's not. It's not somebody to manage the property. It's the experience and track record of if anything goes wrong, you know you've got the right people in place to solve that problem as quick as possible and navigate you through that path. That's the most important thing that you're paying for in a letting agent. It's not somebody that starts tomorrow. It's been your best pal for years, and you think, I'm going to use their business because it's my obligation.
I'll lose your money.
You're playing with fire. You're playing with fire, really, because you've got huge amounts of legislation to contend with.
As I say, I think if you're not sure what's right, I mean, think to yourself whether can you be calm in a crisis? Are you up to date with lettings law? Are you time rich? Do you have a circle of like trusted contractors? And likelihood is probably you don't have all these things. And if so, I think putting a managing agent in place is so important. And I think you will obviously thank yourself in the long run for that.
Look at the landlords we've got just now are meant to be coming on with us, are trying to do their own repairs and improvements themselves. And look at the amount, because I monitor it about the lost rent. You see that in the reports, lost rent are the jobs that are people still waiting to come back to us and come on with us. I'm looking at the lost rent they've got, have taken the time, because they say we're starting in January, for example. And it's like, so when did they say they're going to be finished these works to get this property back on the market? And they usually say, oh, we're going to be finished in, the end of March. Okay. So, right. Okay. That's the timeline, end of March. And then we start monetizing the lost rent when it goes beyond March. And some of these landlords are a year down the line. You've lost £6,000 trying to do it yourself. Are you an idiot? Honestly.
There's a few like that.
It's the height of stupidity. Doing the same thing day in, day out, and expecting a different result. It's sheer stupidity, Richard. And it's commercial, just no commercial acumen with them at all. It's like they're £6,000 down the road in losses, plus the fact you'll be paying the council tax because you're out of your 6-month and 12-month period of your refurbishing, and you'll probably be paying double council tax because it's not for sale. So you're paying another £200 a month. So it's not just that; it's another £2,500 a year in council tax, if not more, probably more actually. So you're paying your council tax on top of that. So you're probably losing £10,000 so far, and you're thinking doing it yourself and trying to get the repairs and improvements all sorted out yourself is going to actually save you money. Because you're going to get really good contractors that's going to charge you cheap fees. And it's like you can't find them. Because every single time, what's the first thing they say? I just can't get the people to do the job. And you're losing money hand over fist. But they don't realise the potential loss that they're having for that very reason. That's why it's important to have the right letting agent with the right contacts that's been in this, had a track record, that understands the commercial reality of being in the property investment business. That £6,000 to £10,000 you've just lost is a tenant's kitchen, bathroom, and possibly heating system. Well, a wee bit extra on top of it.
Yeah.
You've lost that for the tenant as a landlord because you failed to get your property back into the market as quick as possible. Plus the fact somebody's been homeless possibly for a year because your property hasn't been available to them. Because there's a lot of places on their hands right now. Yeah. Think about that as a landlord. If you're managing them yourself, really think about that. The amount of money you're losing and the potential that person, somebody out there, needs your property. And you're still dabbling about this. If you treat this like a hobby, you will get a hobby income. That's the thing that I've always been told by my mentors. You think about this, you think about anything you're doing. If you treat it like a hobby, you'll get a hobby income. You have to speak to the experts. You have to know what to do next. Let's wrap up.
Well, as I say, Jim, the blog has my contact details in it. So anything that we've covered today, please, my number's in there, my direct email's in there. Anybody can come to me. This is just part 1, so we'll do part 2 in the next letting show.
Let's see if we've got any questions on TikTok, because the TikTokers are the ones that always go for it. What's your view on market prices this year? Market prices, pretty good. In terms of house prices, pretty good still. You get the doom and gloom with the Halifax and the Nationwide saying, oh, property prices have dropped for the 6th or 7th month in a row. And it's like, well, if you look at the land registry, property prices haven't really dropped that much for that period of time. I think it's 0.1% they dropped 1 month. And everybody was henny penny and the world was falling in. And it's like, it's only dropped 1.1%. That's nothing. 0.1% of £200,000 is 200 quid or something.
Mhm.
I've lost £200 in my house price. It's like, you've not even sold it yet. It's like, same with rental values. Rental values are quite low. They're actually quite low as well. I mean, this misconception about rental prices have gone up astronomically since, last year or something like that. They've gone up less than inflation. In the last year, the rental prices have actually gone up 4%. Inflation's gone up 10%. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it, government. You might stick that in your pipe and smoke it. That's an old phrase, eh? Anyway, let's move on and see if we've got anything else. About bad landlords. Why? I don't know who said that and what they mean by that. But I tell you what, the UK government did a survey. They know how many landlords are actually bad landlords in their opinion. And I've got these statistics, okay? And they've shared them with me, the UK government, and the think tank actually supplies these statistics. So they shared these statistics with me when we asked about who do you deem as bad landlords? They gave me that number, and then I compared against the 2 million landlords that were there, and that percentage proportion represented 0.005% of the landlord population. Not 5%, 0.005%. Less than half of 0.5%. That's how many bad landlords the government think there is out there. That's appalling, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
To have that statistic, and yet we're all castigated and tarred and feathered as bad landlords. Living rent, I'm not really sure what that is. Tenant, living rent, whatever that is. We actually charge really affordable rents, and often we charge under the actual market rents for our tenants. So I don't. When people talk about living rents, I would happily put it up to the living rent because it's probably more than what I'm charging right now. More than likely, eh? So I'm happy to put up the living rent if anybody wants, but I'm not charging that. I charge probably significantly less than market rents. I want to evict my tenant. This is Jerry of the Jerry the Fruit, aka Grapes. No idea. It's just a TikTok name. I want to evict my tenant as I want to sell my house. Will the tribunal rubber stamp this? Richard?
Well, in the current situation, if you want to sell the property, the only way to do that is if you can prove financial hardship. And you'll need to go through that process with the tribunal. If you have the evidence and prove that you need to sell this property due to financial hardship, then they will rubber stamp it. But you need to have the right evidence and be able to prove that without a doubt.
Can you not just sell a property first? Look, I'm wanting to sell it now, or have they stopped that just now?
At the moment, no.
Wow. That's quite frightening, considering the position you're in. If you want to sell the property, it's like, so you're tied in. And this is
unless you can prove that you need to sell the property for a financial reason, or financial hardship.
And this is why I say a lot of landlords or investors don't want to enter this market, and some are actually exiting the market when they become, when the properties become empty. Because what's happening is they're in this position where they want to sell it because they maybe want to pay off their own mortgage. Now, that's maybe no demonstrating financial hardship, but it's maybe a choice for them. And it's at the peak of the market where selling it just now will get them the best price. Mm-hmm. And they want to decide to do that. But this legislation stops them doing that, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you could still serve notice on your tenant. And if they accept it and think, right, okay, then, and they want to, but if they don't, then obviously your notice.
If they don't, then you've got to apply. Yeah. You've got to apply, because most tenants, when you serve notice them, it's very rare you actually serve notice on a tenant anyway. It's only the last resort. But if you are selling the property and you do serve notice on a tenant and say, look, I'm selling the property, most tenants won't go to a tribunal. They'll just say, yeah, that's okay, I'll go and find another rental. Yeah. And you have to come and go with them, because sometimes it's quite difficult, especially in East Neuk, to find another property, and they want to continue living in East Neuk. Often over maybe about 5 or 6 months, that can actually happen. They do find somewhere else because it's natural, cycle of people leaving and filling properties. They will then find it, and then so you've got a bit of tolerance and degree of tolerance. Then you're happy to wait and negotiate with the tenant and say, yeah, and come and go with them. Then that could usually happen. So I think it's not the case. I would say to you, it's not the case. It's not the case that you automatically apply to the tribunal and you want to evict them. It's the case that you have a discussion with their tenant and say, look, I want to sell the property, I need to sell it. And most tenants will actually say, yeah, that's fine then.
Yeah,
the people like you and I.
If you've got a good relationship with your tenant and you have that sit-down conversation with them and say, look, this is what I'm planning to do. I need to sell my property. And do you know what I mean? And then get that agreement from them rather than just, let's put a notice through the door and you have to leave, I want to sell. Thank it.
I've got somebody that says, get a real job. What, like a social media personality? And that's a real job.
Yes.
Get a real job. I've been doing a real job for all my life. Running several manufacturing companies as a financial director and financial controller is a real job. Running multiple companies as a managing director is a real job. Employing 15, 20 people and then all the ancillary employment actually as a result of what we do and the people with contractors we get in is a real job. And I would ask you, it says, get a real job. What are you doing?
I was just going to say, it'd be interesting to see what they do.
How many tenants are you helping on a daily basis live and manage their life as it happens? How many charities are you helping? How many people in your community are you helping? Then you could say, get a real job. People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, I think the expression is.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's say MS, you got a real job. You wouldn't need to rent. Jerry the Fruit says, if you've got a real job, you wouldn't need to rent.
Then she responds, right, okay.
That is a harsh response. Harsh response, Jerry.
But,
you know, I can't help it if somebody says get a real job, couldn't it? Great philosophy. Thank you very much for that. That was about, we talked about, you know, your tenant's more important than your holiday or your car. That good. Father Wisdom's got to go. Thank you very much for joining us. And thanks for saying about Roger Cook. Just go through some. No problem. Landlord of the Year. Actually, talking about Landlord of the Year, I was actually Fife Council's first approved private landlord, chartermarked. We actually helped set up that scheme. And that scheme later rolled out to landlord accreditation and letting agent accreditation from Fife Council. They actually had the blueprint for this in Scotland. Also, first letting agent accredited by Fife Council as well, when it was in place. So these were upgraded into the Scottish government, and actually that's how accreditation came about, because of Fife Council and because of the involvement that we had in that process. So they took that template. Edinburgh ran with it to begin with, and then obviously when Edinburgh Council gets it, then the Scottish government hears about it, and that's how it all came about. So, you know, thanks very much. Who wants to stay in Fife, Richard? God's country. Fife's God's country, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
It's like, my God, I could take you anywhere in Fife and show you some wonderful places that you've never seen before, and you'll be breathtaking. See the cliffs in Ely and Earlsferry. This is the cliffs that you go down to the golf course in the Fife Coastal Path, and you go up there, where the old gun armaments used to be for to protect the coastline in the wars, and the battalions in the back and everything like that. It's like, you see these. I've got sweeping drone footage coming into that, and the music you put in it, you could just put Jurassic Park music on it, and you'd think you're actually in a feature film. You think this is the opening to a feature film, the way that looks. Remember, a lot of people, Outlander's filmed here as well. Who wants to live in Fife? Wait a minute. Everything you see in Outlander.
So I think that was a question.
Is actually Fife?
Is that an actual question?
Yep, it's Falkland, it's Dysart, it's everywhere like that. Hi, Nick. If you're still watching, maybe he's disappeared by now. Nick Ponte of the Scottish Property Podcast here. Is buy-to-let still worth it with high interest rates? Actually, that's a really good question. We're going to finish off on that. We'll be doing a midweek show about this. Is buy-to-let really worth it? So we'll be putting that up soon. We're putting all the scripts together right now for this midweek show and the articles. But we will be doing a midweek show, Richard and I, about is buy-to-let really still worth it? We'll also do the Wealth Creation show on Monday, 12:30. I'll still be talking about how I lost my first million and how that came about. Tell you what, you'll learn more lessons out of losing $1 million than you will actually getting $1 million, I would say. So I talked about my first million, how I made it, and now I'm talking about how I lost my first million. And all that. So 12:30 Wealth Creation show, and we'll be live on TikTok as well, Instagram, and the social media channels as well right here. And that's it, Richard.
Yeah,
Thanks very
that
much.
was good, Jim. Thanks.
Good
And thanks
show.
everybody for joining in.
Overran quite a bit, but I think this is more to give people good content, good information. Let them have a chance to get their feedback and information as well. Thanks very much for getting me on the show, Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And thanks everybody for watching.